Today we're awakening to love. Awakening to love. And in this teaching, there's a lot of mention about consciousness. Consciousness this and consciousness that. Well, what exactly is consciousness? Well, I'm going to suggest several definitions for you. It's the changing of our thought, feelings, beliefs, attitudes, values, words, and actions. So our consciousness is the sum total of all of our thoughts and feelings. And as we evolve, our consciousness changes. I like to think of our evolution as a spiral. And as we evolve, we're moving in an upward energy pattern. That's how I like to think of it, an upward energy pattern. And by the way, that's why some people leave your lives and new people come in, because you're changing your energy patterns. And so the people who are closer to where you are in consciousness or energy, then you're going to attract those people to you. It's just automatic, just an automatic process. A lot is said about the Christ consciousness. And since this is Easter Sunday, I'm going to speak a little bit about what do we mean by the Christ consciousness. The Christ consciousness is the consciousness of the person whose soul, meaning whose life force, energy, has risen above the experience of the condition and into the realm of higher understanding. So each time we rise above some kind of condition in our life, we're moving into the Christ consciousness. When we rise above, when we roll away the tombstone of our self-imposed limitations. See, most of our limitations, I think, are self-imposed, and many of them are simply because we don't know how to use the laws of the universe. So this teaching in particular is geared to helping us learn what the laws of the universe are, and then move a step farther and actually use them for good. So it's not enough just to know what they are, but we want to be able to use them in a way that benefits us and the world. Benefits the world. So the Christ consciousness is the consciousness of the person who knows who they really are. When we move into the realm of knowing that we are a magnificent spiritual being, we're moving more into our Christ consciousness. So when we say Christ consciousness, we don't just mean the consciousness of Jesus, the Christ. The Christ consciousness is a principle, and it can be called the resurrection principle. The resurrection principle, and each one of us can evoke resurrection principle. And we do that when we bring ourselves in thought and feeling above any conditions in life that we don't like or that are not beneficial for us, whatever that is. So it's also the consciousness of one who soars into the infinite possibilities of what it means to be a God being here on earth, what it means to be an individualized expression of the one power and presence, right here, right now. So the moment you truly desire Christ consciousness and make a decision that will be how you will live your life, the moment you awaken to love, in that moment, you unlock the potential that is locked up inside of you to be that. Because our Christ consciousness is always there, and we evoke it by growing in love, making decisions and following through with them. You can say to yourself, I decide anew, and I arise anew. So sometimes we find ourselves in a situation that we've created, by the way, and we want to change something about it. So you see, each moment we can make a new decision about whatever it is we're finding ourselves in. So we don't have to be stuck. We don't have to stay in the tomb. We can roll away the stone and set ourselves free into a more vibrant and productive energy. So the resurrection principle really is all around us, in nature especially. If there were not the resurrection principle, when the leaves fall from the trees in the autumn, they wouldn't be able to grow back. You see, but there is a resurrection. The tree outside my kitchen window now is filled with little green leaves. And just a month ago, it was barren. So that's the resurrection principle. And it not only works for nature, it works for each one of us. If we cut our finger, we don't worry about it too much unless it's a really bad cut, because we know there is a resurrection principle. The cut will heal itself. And this is true, you see, of the entire universe. Without the resurrection principle, we would be stuck in any unpleasant happening in our lives. Anyone here ever have anything unpleasant in your life? I think most of us have, okay, but we've moved beyond it, you see. We've decided anew. We've moved beyond it. It's the resurrection principle, you see. We can make a new choice. We can make a new choice. So we might say that when we make new decisions, we're on our Easter journey. We're on our resurrection principle. When we move from anything in our life that is limiting us, anything in which we have put a stone in front of our tomb, when we emerge from our tomb and recognize who we are. We're spiritual, powerful, spiritual beings. And so, filled with new possibilities, infinite potential. Infinite potential. So we take our Easter journey whenever we get mesmerized by conditions and we move into fear and doubt and poor me and this kind of energy. We take our Easter journey when we move above all of that. When we rise above conditions in our lives that we don't like. And just as a reminder, let's remember that all of the things in our life we have created, whether you like it or not, each one of us has created, so each one of us can change it. We can resurrect ourselves from anything that we don't like. That's powerful business. We can resurrect ourselves. We don't need to rely on other people, although sometimes it's helpful when they support us. But basically, we rely upon ourselves with the renewed consciousness, and we create a new experience. So each of us has taken our Easter journey all the time. It's not just once a year kind of thing. We're on this movement. We're on this spiral of movement. And as long as we continue with it and recognize it for what it is, then we are able to rise above any conditions that we don't particularly approve of. So that's your resurrection principle. That's your Easter journey. And each one of us takes it every day, every second of every day. We're making decisions. So we want to decide anew into more powerful decisions. There was so much material I had on the resurrection and Easter. I took most of yesterday just eliminating that which I would not use today in my talk. One of the first ones I included was an interview that I kept a record of, an interview with Deepak Chopra back when Larry King had his talk show. So it's been a few years, and Deepak had just written a new book at that particular time, and the book that he had written at that particular time was Life After Death, The Burden of Proof. So I want to connect the Easter story with what's happening in our lives. I mean, to make it more than just a story we read about and Easter eggs and bunnies, and that's all fun. But there's more to it than that. So the question asked to Deepak was, one of the most fascinating aspects of life after death is your belief that we can prepare for the afterlife. Can you explain? Deepak answers, I don't mean religious preparation or trying to live a good life so you can get into heaven. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. But to the ancient rishis of India, there was no strict division between this life, and the afterlife. No strict division. Both are created in consciousness. Your level of awareness is the one and only thing that determines how life turns out. Every person you know, everything that happens to you originates at the deepest level of your own consciousness. And I'll add, like it or not. Oh. In other words, you're the author of your own life. Now, can this be proved? Deepak says he's tried to do that in this particular book. He says you can project the kind of life you want, and that includes life after death. You see, there's always returning the power to the individual. So we have the control of our consciousness after we leave this planet, is the belief being expressed here. So we're creating the world as we are here on the planet, and the same thing's going to be true when we leave the planet. So, and then the question asked to Deepak is, who's the burden on? Because part of the title of his book is The Burden of Proof. And Deepak answers, the burden is on us. If we really want to have an experience or an idea or a knowledge about life after death, we can't depend on belief anymore, because belief is a cover-up for insecurity. And then he goes on to say, you don't have to believe in electricity because it's real, whether you believe in it or not. See? You don't have to believe in gravity because, see, it's real. I mean, you can say, I don't believe in gravity, and I can knock this cup over and it's going to fall, right? You see, that gravity is going to be there whether I believe in it or not. And of course, the same thing is true of the spiritual laws of the universe. They're there whether we believe them or not. So it seems to me it would be to our advantage to know what they are and to cooperate with them, which is the basis of this teaching. So the question is, can we explain that there is such a thing as consciousness that outlives the death of the physical body? Deepak Chopra answers, yes, we can. We're in a very interesting time of history right now in evolution, where scientists are looking at what is consciousness. See, it's no longer just the philosophers or the mystics. We're talking about hardcore scientists now are investigating what is consciousness. They're taking it seriously. They're investigating where thoughts come from. Where are memories located? Where does imagination come from? Where does inspiration, insight, intuition, creativity, free will come from? These are not the attributes of the brain, Larry, he says. They are the qualities of our soul. Not the attributes of the brain, but the quality of our soul. And today scientists say that if you go to very fundamental levels of nature, then the world is a discontinuity, which means everything is going on and off at the speed of light. And then there's a lot of discussion about that. And then the question is, well, what happens when we die? And here's Deepak Chopra's answer. What happens when we die is that the soul continues on. And that's also the belief that Science of Mind teaches. The soul continues on. And then it imagines itself into a new existence. It imagines itself into a new existence. And Larry King says, and you know this? You know this to be true? And Deepak says, well, I know this first from my practices of meditation, by examining the wisdom traditions of the world, and by looking at near-death experiences, and by looking at out-of-body experiences. Larry King asked him, do you fear death? I don't fear it, Deepak says, because if you get in touch with that part of yourself now that never dies, there's nothing to fear. If you get in touch with that part of you now, that spiritual essence that is already within you, innately within you now, then there's nothing to fear. Because that's what you're going to be traveling with. That's what you're going to be traveling with. In one of his other books, I recall now, Chopra has one of his characters say, the only reason people fear death is because they think they were born. So what he's basically saying is, when we emerge from the womb of our mothers, yes, it was a physical appearance here on the planet, but it was not the beginning of our soul. Think about that. So if we believe then that we existed in some way before we emerged here on the planet, then when what we call death comes, it's simply moving down the river. It's not an end. It's not an end to our consciousness. So Science of Mind teaches, we use the term transition rather than death, because nothing ever dies. It transitions into different planes of existence or different forms. Which brings me to the next question when Larry King says, and you say this soul comes back in another form? Deepak answers, the soul takes a leap of creativity and takes its previous experience, and then, through its creativity, expresses itself as meaning, context, relationships, and the archetypal themes of our life. If we live consciously now and we are fully aware of what we are doing right now, we create the best future for ourselves, including after we die. So I guess we can't go wrong studying consciousness. Oh, and making the good decisions for ourselves, following what nurtures us, following what feeds our soul. There's a group I read about. They meet every week, and the first question, the only question actually, is, how is your soul today? How is your soul today? That's a good question to ask yourself. Because many times we don't feed our soul. We do things that are not nurturing. So it seems to me the intelligent thing to do would be to nurture our soul. And there's no guilt involved in that. There's no guilt. I've come to the conclusion that as I nurture my soul, I'm also nurturing the souls of other people. As I take care of myself, I'm also helping other people. Well, one reason is they don't have to take care of me if I'm taking care of myself. Love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself, as yourself. So there's just so much about this. A suggestion that Deepak makes is to prepare for death when you're healthy. The Dalai Lama, for example, meditates on his death every day. And there's also a book written by the man who wrote Everything I Learned in Kindergarten. What's his name? Fulgrim, right. Well, he wrote another book about transitioning, and his choice of what to do with his body once he makes his transition was to cremate it. And then his children insisted that he buy a burial plot so they would have a place to come and visit. So he did buy the burial plot. And then what he does every New Year's Day, he takes a chair and he puts the chair at the place of the burial plot, and he meditates and talks to himself about his transition. So that's his New Year's Day ritual. And I would imagine that the more one does that, the less fearful one is about death or, about moving on from this plane of existence. So that's another tool, if you say, of doing this. So anyway, Deepak, toward the end, says, we create our reality, whether it's here, thereafter, or any other dimension. So that's the bottom line. We are multidimensional beings that live multidimensionally. In the Science of Mind book written by Dr. Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of this philosophy, he has a section entitled Finding the Christ. And if you want some inspirational reading today, this Easter Sunday, you might just look at that section and read portions of it. One section that I think is very inspirational, when he writes, "The answer to every question is within us, because we are within spirit, and spirit is an indivisible whole. The solution to every problem is within us. The healing of all disease is within us. The forgiveness of sin is within us. The raising of the dead is within us. Heaven is within us." And Jesus prayed, "Our Father which art in heaven," and then he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." So you see, the universe, the principle of the universe, the resurrection principle is within each one of us. Is within each one of us. And we know, of course, that this whole Easter story represents what we can do to rise above any conditions that we don't like in our lives. And I couldn't end today without reading you a story. It's called The Water Bug Story. And it was first published in 1971 by a woman named Doris Stickney. And the story goes like this. It seemed that a colony of water bugs lived in the muck at the bottom of a lily pond. They were happy, normal, everyday water bugs. And they were happy except for one mystery. They could not understand why every now and then one of their number would crawl up the stem of a lily pad and never be seen again. So one day, one member of the water bug colony called a meeting of all the water bugs. And he said, "Look, this keeps happening and we don't understand what's happening. Let's make a pact right now that the next time one of us crawls up on one of these lily stems, they will come back and tell us what's happening." And would you believe it? Just at that precise moment, the very water bug who had called the meeting had an irresistible urge to climb the stem of the lily pad. And he began to do so. And laboriously he found himself within time at the bottom of the lily pad and flung himself over, exhausted, onto the top of the lily pad into the sunlight, a new element. It was a whole new dimension for him. After some time, he awakened, and for the first time in his life, he felt himself to be encased by a stiff, brittle coating. But something in him urged him to beat against it with all his might, and the hard shell cracked. And he rose a beautiful blue-green dragonfly, skimming over the surface of the pond on gleaming wings. As he flew back and forth across the pond, looking down into it, in his imagination, he could see his family and friends there, still in the muck, still water bugs, seemingly happy, enjoying themselves, and wondering what had happened to him. And he said to himself, I can't go back. I can't go back and tell them. But one day, each of them will discover for themselves what is happening to me. They will all have the same marvelous experience. And so it is.